did you grow up with like parents and grandparents using expressions or names of people and you had no idea who they were or what they meant? And then one day you stumble across like, oh, there really is a little Jimmy Dickens. We've got that for you, plus a bedtime story in today's Oddcast.
Well, we always have an odd one in the crowd.
So it's kind of odd.
Decidedly odd.
Doesn't that strike you as a little bit odd?
No, it doesn't strike me as a little bit odd.
It's the Bob and Sheri Oddcast, with stuff we wouldn't, couldn't, or shouldn't do on the regular show. Now, here's the Oddcast.
I really don't blame any one thing for how weird I turned out because I kind of think I was born this way. Like all my early memories are very peculiar. So I think I was just kind of born this way, but it sure didn't help being raised by older people from 2 generations back who their references, their pop culture and historical references, I had no idea what they were talking about a lot of the time. Like we would be playing in the backyard and my grandmother, one of them would take a cigarette out of her mouth and say, "Oh, that one thinks he's Andy Hardy." No idea who Andy Hardy was, right? No idea till I was like an adult. Like, oh, that's what she meant. And she's not wrong, right? So these crazy references to performers and products, like I think there might have been an actual object or toy named Chatty Cathy. Do you know about Chatty Cathy? That was my nickname. But I think maybe there was some sort of a Chatty Cathy doll. And then Lamar, as a former, still ventriloquist, I guess.
Yeah.
My aunts referred to one of the neighbors as Charlie McCarthy's dummy. I got Charlie McCarthy mixed up in my head with Senator Joseph McCarthy. And I'm like, our neighbors are communists? What is happening here?
So they didn't call it Edgar Bergen's dummy?
It was Charlie McCarthy the dummy?
Yeah. And Edgar Bergen was a ventriloquist.
Yeah.
And
I'm confused.
His daughter,
Thank you, Max.
his daughter is Candace Bergen.
Murphy Brown, get out.
Yeah.
So, but again, this is what happens. And you would, like any little thing, like if my grandmother didn't like the way I was dressed, especially as a teenager, she would be like, "Sheri, go back and change. You look like the little match girl." The hell is the little match girl? Like what?
I don't know what that is.
I have no
Well,
idea.
you're gonna find out because today's bedtime story is, and it's very seasonally appropriate, the little match girl. But let's wait a minute till we get to that. Because I'm figuring that Lamar, with his colorful upbringing, probably had all sorts of goofy things said to him that he didn't understand what they were getting at, didn't you? Like my family can't be the only one.
No, my earliest memories of that was like I'd be out in the yard playing and I'd get dirty and I would come to walk into the trailer and my mom would say, "Oh my God, you look like a Dutton." And I'm like, "What does that mean? I look like a Dutton?"
Not the people from Yellowstone.
No, not yet. No, this is a whole completely different set of Duttons. And they were people that lived up the road, and they were rough, man. They were rough. They were criminals, and they were drinkers, and they just, and every time you saw them, they were disheveled, and that was the whole point. But every time something happened, she goes, "You acting like a Dutton. You talk like a Dutton. Get cleaned up. You look like a Dutton," But it was a while before I understood what she was saying, and it wasn't really kind. I don't think now that I know what the Duttons were. But
Lamar, my family would invoke the Tobins, which I thought was rich, because as I pointed out to my grandma one day, Mr. Tobin is not on the news the way my father is. I think maybe we're the family other people use as an example of how not to be. She was outraged. "Oh, Sheri, don't even say things like that." Oh, you just characterized the Tobins as barely civilized. Now, did they live on the same street as the Duttons? Oh God, no, you're only allowed one family like that per neighborhood.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Did Carla grow up like that too? Did Carla have the Duttons?
Yeah. She didn't have the Duttons. She had, we've talked about this before. What was the name that I used? What was it?
We know what.
We had the Wharf family in our neighborhood. These were young men who at the age of 10 and 12 were dabbling in explosives in the backyard.
Carla had a family, and it's on the tip of my tongue, and I can't come up with it right now. But she had a family, and she and her mama would do the same thing to her that my mama did to me. But then she wound up going a few streets down and got to meet the little girl that was part of the family, and they got to be good friends. And so every time she'd go down there, her mom would say, "Oh my God, listen, you're going to catch something when you go down there. You know, I mean, she was afraid she was going to get lice and everything else." Yeah.
It's wild how that works, because I know my grandma will be like, "The Tobins, she makes ragu." Well, we make meth, Grandma, so I don't know if we should be pointing fingers. This idea of like woefully out of step cultural references is something I think about a lot, because we no longer share a culture. We no longer really share references. And you have to really work. If you have kids, you have to really pay attention to their universe, or you will not know what the hell your kids are talking about. And they certainly do not know what you are talking about. Like when the TV show Dr. Odyssey launched with Joshua Jackson, Pacey from Dawson's Creek, as I prefer to remember him. I was chatting with one of my daughters, and I was like, "Oh my God." I think she was asking about the show, and I was like, "I think Lamar's going to review this year's version of The Love Boat." And she's like, "What's that?" And I said, this TV show, Dr. Odyssey, that Pacey's on. Who? Pacey from Pacey from Fringe, and he was married to Jodie Turner Smith. The Love Boat, and my kid is just looking at me like,
looking at you, yeah.
And so at that point, I know I can't talk about Mitzi Gaynor. Like, what's she gonna do with that?
Yeah.
So, one of the things that my grandma, all the women in my family, because they were all the first children born in this country. They were all their parents were immigrants, all Ellis Island kids. And so they grew up really poor, and for the most part in the city in Philadelphia. A couple of them, as they got older and got married, moved out into like Jersey and Pennsylvania. But for the most part, these were street kids. These were city kids. And they had city kid references, right? So for my grandparents, they came up on the mean streets with like Mickey Rooney and James Cagney. And then my father's references were like doo-wop and Fabian, none of which made any sense to me as a kid. But one of my grandmother's favorite things to accuse me of was looking like the little match girl. So one day when I was probably 14 or 15, I dragged a book of fairy tales out at the library and looked up the little match girl. And sure enough, it's a Hans Christian Andersen story. And it just wasn't in the fairy tale book we had at the house. Every family has a collection of fairy tales. I think almost every family has at least one collection of fairy tales. And maybe yours at your house is the Disney version of Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and all of that. Maybe you grew up with the Real Brothers Grimm books or whatever. But not every fairy tale is in every one of these stories. And so I'd never heard of the little match girl. So it's set on New Year's Eve. And like all of your Hans Christian Andersen stories, it's good and tragic. So here we go, kids. Bedtime story, The Little Match Girl. It was dreadfully cold. It was snowing fast and was almost dark as evening came on, the last evening of the year, in the cold and darkness. And there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home, she had slippers on, it is true, but they were much too large for her feet. Slippers that her mother had used until then, and the poor little girl lost them running across the street when two carriages were passing terribly fast. When she looked for them, one was not to be found, and a boy seized the other and ran away with it, saying he would use it as a cradle someday when he had children of his own. So on the little girl went with her bare feet that were red and blue with cold. In an old apron that she wore were bundles of matches, and she carried a bundle also in her hand. No one had bought so much as a bunch all day long, and no one had given her even a penny. Poor little girl, shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, a perfect picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long flaxen hair, which hung in pretty curls about her throat, but she thought not of her beauty, nor of the cold. Lights gleamed in every window, and there came to her the savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve, and it was of this which she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sat cowering down. She had drawn under her little feet, but still she grew colder and colder, yet she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches and could not bring a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her, and besides, it was cold enough at home, for they had only the house roof above them, and though the largest holes had been stopped with straw and rags, there were left many through which the cold wind whistled. And now her little hands were nearly frozen with cold. Alas, a single match might do her good if she might only draw it from the bundle, rub it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. So at last she drew one out. Whoosh! How it blazed and burned. It gave out a warm, bright flame like a little candle as she held her hands over it. A wonderful little light it was. It really seemed to the little girl as if she sat before a great iron stove with polished brass feet and brass shovel and tongs. So blessedly it burned that the little maiden stretched out her feet to warm them also. How comfortable she was. But lo, the flame went out, the stove vanished, and nothing remained but the little burned match in her hand. She rubbed another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell upon the wall, it became transparent like a veil, so that she could see through it into the room. A snow white cloth was spread upon the table, on which was a beautiful china dinner service, while a roast goose, stuffed with apples and prunes, steamed famously and sent forth a most savory smell. And what was more delightful still and wonderful, the goose jumped from the dish with knife and fork still in its breast and waddled along the floor straight to the little girl. But the match went out, and nothing was left to her but the thick, damp wall. She lighted another match, and now she was under a most beautiful Christmas tree, larger and far more prettily trimmed than the one she'd seen through the glass doors at the rich merchant's. Hundreds of wax tapers were burning on the green branches, and gay figures, such as she had seen in the shop windows, looked down upon her. The child stretched out her hands to them, and then the match went out. But still the lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher. She saw them as stars in heaven, and one of them fell, forming a long trail of fire. Now someone is dying, murmured the child softly, for her grandmother, the only person who had loved her and who was now dead, had told her that whenever a star falls, a soul mounts up to God. She struck yet another match against the wall, and again it was light. And in the brightness there appeared before her her dear old grandmother, bright and radiant, yet sweet and mild and happy as she had never looked on earth. "Oh, grandmother," cried the child, "take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You too will vanish, like the warm stove, the splendid New Year's feast, the beautiful Christmas tree." And lest her grandmother should disappear, she rubbed the whole bundle of matches against the wall. And the matches burned with such a brilliant light that it became brighter than noonday. Her grandmother had never looked so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both flew together joyously and gloriously, mounting higher and higher far above the earth. And for them, there was neither hunger, nor cold, nor care. They were with God. But in the corner, at the dawn of day, sat the poor little girl leaning against the wall, with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and cold she sat with the matches, one bundle of which was burned. She wanted to warm herself, poor little thing, people said, but no one imagined what sweet visions she had had, or how gloriously she had gone with her grandmother to enter upon the joys of a new year. The end. And folks, my grandmother called me the little match girl, and I learned in adulthood that the little match girl froze to death after hallucinating from hunger and cold.
I was waiting on a happy ending, but boy,
There's
I
no
felt
happy
like
ending
this.
here.
I felt like this was going to turn around. I was hoping it was going to turn
Did you?
around.
Yeah.
Did you know
I felt that way about my life,
I
Lamar.
had some happy music at the ready, and then when I
God.
heard she froze to death, I was
Oh, that had to
I
go.
should have known. Listen, Max. I should have known better. If she's reading the story, there is no happy ending. Having Sheri read a story is like going and watching a Disney movie with a dog in it. There's no happy ending.
It's not going
here.
well. It's not going well.
No. Oh,
Now, I want you to
God.
imagine little parentless child that I was, being raised by my sweet grandmother and being referred to as the little match girl with no idea of what that really meant.
Man. Well, that's a tough
And-
one.
And I also have to point out, you remember before I shared the story of the little match girl, I did say to you that most families have a collection of fairy tales, but not all the fairy tales are in them. And that's because normal people with healthy functioning sense do not gather their children around at night and read them stories like the one I just read you, because that's how the kids have nightmares.
I'm going to
This
have
was
one.
Lamar, this was a little girl that had two choices: go home and be beaten, or die in an alleyway after hallucinating.
Thank you for clearing that up. I feel so much better about it now.
By the way, Lamar, this is the happy music that I was at for the end of the story.
Yes.
See, I was ready with this because I went, oh, things are going to look up for the little match girl.
No.
She's
Let me go ahead and, from now on, if she's going to read a story, don't get the happy music. You're wasting your time.
Next time, kids, how Captain Hook lost his hand. Spoiler alert. He didn't misplace it.
Oh my God.
And a joyous
When y'all get a
Noel to
chance,
all of you.
read Old Yella. It'd be an uplifting story compared to some of these. Oh, please.
Oh,
my God.
man. That was brutal.
Think how I felt. Y'all, I was the little match girl. Think how I felt.
You could have stopped the story at them floating up to heaven. Me and Max would have been all right with that.
We would have been okay with that. Yeah. I thought Grandma
Oh,
showed up.
let me
Things
redo
are
it.
looking up for the little match girl.
For she and grandmother were with God. And the next morning, when the sun dawned, the wealthy merchant saw the little match girl curled up in the alley, near frozen, her chest barely moving. And he scooped her into his arms, and he said, "Child, I know not from whence you come, but from this moment forward, you shall be my daughter, and you shall want for nothing." And they all lived happily ever after. That's how life works.
There you go.
Because that's reality. That's reality.
It's amazing
the
what
moment.
30 words will do. 30 words can change everything. Thank you.
Oh, sure, a second ago, you were hallucinating and dying of hypothermia, but now some rich asshole scooped you up and changed your whole destiny. On next week's Oddcast, the little boy from Hartwell, Georgia, with a dream.
Woo! Hey, doggies.
Just wait till you see what kind of ending I come up with for that one.
I hope it's good. That's
Yeah, it's
all
the
I'm
best.
saying.
Oh, it is the best. There is feasting and merriment and good and glad tidings for all. So thank you all for joining us for the Oddcast. And hey, if you're not creeped out enough, we've got a brand new episode of True Weird Stuff coming out this Friday, and you can certainly get your creepy enjoys from that. Lamar, tell them that they should tell people about it and not be a quitter and stuff, okay? That's my favorite part.
Yeah. No, keep going. We hate a quitter. We hate a quitter. Stay with it. Stay with it.
And then the little match girl woke up and realized, what a nightmare, for I am actually Taylor Allison Swift, a billionaire pop star and beloved to everyone. Where are the cats? The end. We'll see you on the next Oddcast.
All right.